Welcome to the Breadwinners. I'm Rachael Ellison. This week on the show, we're talking about Horizon. This season is about exploring 5 different elements of this model called the shift model. It's security, horizon, impact, fluidity, and ties. This week, we're looking at what does professional growth look like in this post-pandemic, poorly executed return to office policies, AI-focused, who knows what end is up sometimes workplace. So, true confession. When I was applying to graduate school, I had this total fantasy in my head. I believed that my educational pedigree, my choice of school, would ultimately lead me to a long and stable career. I kid you not, despite all the different paths to success I saw around me, I had this idea because of how and where I grew up that any career challenge could ultimately be overcome with a good school and a linear career path that would follow. It was like the dad in My Big Fat Greek Wedding and Windex, right? He would spray it on anything and it would cure everything. And unlike him, I realized that spoiler alert, he still thinks it's good at the end. I realized that there was barely any truth to that idea. I later learned, working in higher ed, just how untrue that was. In reality, it's about how you adapt in context, whether it's to your organization, to the economy, to your interests, to your life. Today, we are joined by Andy Palmer and Omer Trajman, 2 people who are truly embracing this moment and innovating around Horizon. Andy is an entrepreneur, founder at Koa Labs in Cambridge, Mass, and CEO at Tamer. He's also the co-author of a new career book called Live for a Living, which is a pretty great idea. I love this quote. He and his co-author Paula write, "We'd like you to think of this moment in time as a great opportunity. Today's climate is one in which you can feel empowered with a heightened sense of autonomy and control, have greater clarity of your priorities, and align your career around the life you want to live." Chapter 2 of that book is the story of AI analytics expert and my second guest, Omer Trajman. Omer grew up around the corner from me. We reconnected on LinkedIn when I saw his LinkedIn headline, I guess, focused on the future of work. So I was like, ding. And then I found his company, Askfora Professional, which was the tagline is better work with people you know. So I thought it would help me find different connections as I reestablish my entrepreneurial life. We got to talking. We connected and we got to talking about his vision for Askfora. And it went well beyond that function in Askfora Professional. It was about using AI to move us to focus on skills instead of pedigree, to be able to essentially get an X-ray view of the skills that exist in your networks, both inside and outside of a company, using public data for better recruitment, customized learning, and planning for the future. When I left my role leading the future of work for a big institution, a lot of people would ask me, what's the solution to the future of work? It was very much tongue-in-cheek. Short answer, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Long answer, we need to start getting curious about what's possible and embracing innovation. We're not going to find the answers by looking backwards and trying to revert to the way things were. We need hiring processes that match the diversity of talent in our workforce, not Windex. That's what Omer's doing. He's not Windexing. And I'm happy to be supporting his work and talking to other entrepreneurs in this space. Enjoy this conversation about exploring Horizon at this moment of great opportunity. What skills have you found most valuable in your career progression, and how have you continued to develop them to get to where you are today?
You want to go first?
I'll say hi and thank you. This came up in a conversation with a bunch of other founders I had where we were kind of going through the question of what they described it as superpowers. What do you have that's a little different and odd that makes you, in this case, a founder? For me, I seem to thrive in highly ambiguous, uncertain environments. The more variables and the more opportunities where other folks might see this as a challenge of focusing, I tend to see clarity, right? Just pick a direction, go test it, get the feedback, course correct, pick a different direction. I don't know how to describe that as a skill.
I've been working with Omer on Askfora. I think what he's building is revolutionary. And it so makes sense to me that right now, when everyone is so confused and lost, that this is your moment to shine. And this is when your superpower comes out and you're like, hey, we can do this. Andy, what about you?
The thing that has made the biggest difference for me over the years has been the core ability and commitment to be an apprentice and eventually to be a mentor. And kind of this dynamic you described, it's like, well, you have these, people earlier in their career that are trying to learn basic skills. And then you have people that are more, a little bit, more advanced, and maybe they're trying to figure out how to lead and manage people. And the irony is, like, these are the same people, right? The leaders and managers of today were individual contributors, 10, 20 years ago. First few jobs I had out of grad school were, I had the benefit of having these incredible mentors. And I viewed my work as I was doing essentially entrepreneurial apprenticeship, working for great entrepreneurs that were doing amazing things and learning from them. And that's a big part of what's inspired me in the later part of my career to be a mentor and to help people as much as I can, especially young folks and first-time entrepreneurs. Because, that's really, like, I think the most highly leveraged skill that I learned early on was how to be an apprentice and what it means to be a mentor for somebody. And somehow in our post-industrial world, like, we lost somewhere along the way this idea that the way you learn things and the way you develop professionally is through mentorship and apprenticeship. There was this idea that there's, like, the companies are factories and they have people working on widgets in factories, and it's not actually how people learn and grow and develop. And it's also not really the nature of most of the work that goes on in the world today. Yeah.
This resonates so much because this is sort of the beginning of the relationship Andy and I had. I was much in need of mentorship, and I think willing to be an apprentice at Vertica many, many years ago. I was an engineer, not a great one, and willing to learn the ways of how to work with customers and be out in the field. And Andy was critical in that journey.
What I'm hearing from you, both openness to learning and curiosity, is it's exciting. I think it's what we all need to be thinking about right now. We are at this moment where so much has changed, right? We've gone through these major transformations, but folks are really struggling to get their head around, like, what happened just now? Where are we? Where are we going? And there's just this great deal of uncertainty that folks have, in trying to figure out how to navigate what's next. I'm curious, when you both think about what's happened over the past couple of years, what word or phrase comes to mind for you?
I think more important than kind of the last few years, 2 or 3 years, was like what happened the previous decade. And we're coming off the largest bull market in the history of the world. And there were expectations that were created by at least a generation or two of young people that came into the world of work during the 2010s. And we had a similar dynamic in the 1990s, that everything was up and to the right. There was all these opportunities. Everything was good. And, even if it wasn't good here, you go find some other place where it was good. And so we're kind of in a hangover right now from that. And as big as the enthusiasm was and as positive as everything was, the hangover is kind of proportional. And so people feeling like it's uncertain and ambiguous and difficult and hard is kind of the right thing. I think as a society, we're so affluent now in the developed countries. We're so comfortable. That sort of comfort was sort of reinforced by the economic prosperity of the 2010s. Like the world is fundamentally an ambiguous place, and it can be really hard. And so I think feeling uncertain right now is the right way to feel. I mean, you look at the macroeconomic trends, and you're like, wow, like, look at the interest rates, and you look at unemployment, you're like, it makes no sense. This is an unprecedented time in terms of macroeconomic indicators. So I think being, uncertain, I think it's the right way to feel,
I'd say uncertainty is daily. You don't know what you're going to wake up to. That the response to that, the word that comes to mind for me is what do you do in those uncertain times? And the word that came to mind for me was ownership. When you have such uncertainty, taking ownership, taking responsibility, not letting sort of the world dictate what's going to happen to you, and saying, no, I'm going to decide what path I want. And it's not going to necessarily be 100% because you don't know what's going to come out of left field, but at least having that ownership and that responsibility to say, this is what I'm going to do about it, or what I'm going to do for myself or for others, or just support people.
So my book, Live for a Living, the key message we're trying to send people is take ownership over your own professional development. Like that, in the face of uncertainty about what you're going to do for work, and own that yourself. And as tempting as it might be, especially if you go to work for a big company where they want to sort of reinforce this paternalism, like, well, we're going to give you career paths and we're going to show you the way. And when you go and ask people at big companies like that have followed those career paths, like, well, did you end up happy in your career? Were you, really satisfied? And almost unanimously, no. And then you talk to the people that are really happy in their careers, almost all of them made their own path and owned the outcomes in their career. And so I think, Omer's dead on. Like, in the face of uncertainty, you embrace that uncertainty and you own it. And you're like, well, what am I going to do in order to make my life as good as it can be, and my career and my personal life, kind of take control?
In your book, you talk about personal resonance when you're talking about, multi-stage career acts. I think we have these moments that you're both describing of uncertainty where you need to take ownership. But I think after years of chronic stress and dysregulation that many people are feeling, they have trouble figuring out what is that it is personal resonance, right? That's the term that you used, or was it? Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me at the core here, like, and I think this is, there's a broader societal thing going on with, young people. And I think how young people are grown and developed by their parents. Omer and I are extreme examples. Our tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty is extreme. Like, most people are not 2 standard deviations out, right? But there's a lesson to be learned where the way that you build confidence is by actually, taking some risks and doing some things, and then realizing that, oh, I felt uncertain, but, the uncertainty had as much opportunity in it as it did fear, right? Yeah. And too often, I think people, when they describe or feel uncertain and unsure, they're focused on the negative. But the reality is, when, this happens a lot when people lose their jobs or get fired, based on my experience, when they have a change like that, whether it's self-inflicted or whether, they're sort of laid off, that very often they find something else that they really love, that's really interesting and fun and exciting, right? And they reflect on that time and they're like, well, I was really uncertain, was really scared. And then I came out even better on the other side. The fundamental way you overcome uncertainty is not through some paternalistic, top-down, someone making you feel better, right? The way, the source of confidence, like, always comes from within and from a self-activation. And as hard as it might be sometimes, and again, this is where the mentor apprenticeship thing comes in. A lot of my mentors in the worst times, when things were scariest, they were my rock, my foundation, and that this is how we can help people, right? Help each other.
A trend I've seen playing out, and this is, Andy says young people, and I chuckle because I look at him like, yeah, I'm a young person. Andy's old, except not really. We're both old now. Kids who are really young, so just entering their careers, call it mid, maybe late 20s. The shift I've seen talking to other employers is that the way that ownership and the way people are responding to the uncertainty is they are finding, whether it's mentorship or risk-taking opportunities in classically what we would call a side hustle.
Right.
So they have a job, maybe they think of it as a career, maybe it's just a place to make some money, but that's not the only place that people are spending their time and investing their time.
Mm-hmm.
The kid who might enjoy downtime playing video games for fun finds the opportunity to turn that into a Twitch live stream,
Right.
and get some sponsorship. And maybe they're not comfortable taking a risk and saying, I'm going to do that full time. I'm going to become a professional esports player. But it's a little bit of money on the side, and it gives them sort of a small step out of the normal career trajectory, the normal day-to-day job. May not be fulfilling, that may not give them any kind of opportunities to take risk in the workplace.
It's a really interesting thread because, I mean, Omer does so much work in the gig economy and people kind of combining different projects or career acts, as we like to call them in the book, or like Reid Hoffman in Alliances calls these tours of duty.
Yeah, I love that book.
Yeah. It's shocking when you look at the difference. I've done some work, outside of the US, and in places like Switzerland, employment in a commercial organization is almost like an entitlement. Like they think of many of them big pharmaceutical or financial services companies over there. They think of the people, the citizens in that country think about the employment with those companies is almost like a form of, something that the government and society provides for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of antithetical to the way that we've set up employment formally here in the US. It's like almost all employment in the US is at will. And a lot of folks have heard, sort of describe that, there's sort of two sides to this argument. The one I tend to fall on is the one I think the at-will employment situation is actually better, because if you look at where the world's going in the next 10, 20, 50 years, the ability to sort of have flexibility in your work and configure things and do that very dynamically is a huge advantage. Because when you treat employment like this entitlement, as comforting as it can feel when you get laid off and you've got 6 months or something, it's also a limiter when you decide you want to leave a job and go do something else. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the best opportunities come along and they're gone within a month or two. There's a huge advantage in this country of like this fluid nature of employment. And I think we need to view it as a positive. And I think young people especially need to sort of take advantage of that.
Andy, to your point we are in this at-will model. I like that we're not entitled to our jobs, that it's this give and take, this opportunity for creativity. What should companies be thinking about now, right? As we've come into this era that we've talked about being so uncertain, what's most important for companies, for leaders to be thinking about? Should leaders be approaching this as mentors to the folks who work for them? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think if you look forward in the economy and you look at employment, we're going to be massively short of the people that we need to do work. The demographics are pretty clear now. Like this low employment numbers, like this is a new reality, in my opinion. And the only way I think you really are able to retain people is through professional development. That they'll probably always have somebody, if they're good people, like somebody that's going to come along and offer them more money or, something else. But if the people that work for you believe that you're committed to their professional development and satisfying their professional development very broadly, it's almost an immutable kind of retention method. And sometimes it means if like in the case of what we do at Tamer, we're so committed to people, like sometimes their next career act or tour of duty is in some other company doing some other thing. We're unconditionally supportive of that. It may not be the easiest thing for us, but when other people watch us sort of be that committed to people's development, like, wow, like it was really hard to make that adjustment, but they did the right thing for the individual.
I've spoken to many HR folks and worked with HR folks who are like, wait, I'm going to train somebody out of this job. I don't want to train them out. Yeah. That's so expensive. Well, I want them here. I want them to stay. And I think that brings me to you, Omer, just what you're creating with Askfora. Yes, they need to change their mindset. So but they also have these tools to be able to grow within their companies.
Yeah, I'd say when I got started focusing on not just hiring as a hiring manager, but actually trying to solve problems in the sphere of talent management, professional development, my original position was 180 degrees from what Andy just described. And we'd have these conversations where Andy was super passionate about development and the mentorship and apprenticeship model. And I'd experienced that. And I was like, yeah, I don't think that works anymore. I think that.
Wait, why? Why? What was your thinking?
So I was kind of viewing the world as becoming purely transactional.
Sure.
Right? Everyone would take 100% ownership, develop their own skills, sell them to the highest bidder, and the most successful companies would basically compete for skills just to get jobs done. AI would come in and start taking over some of those jobs. And so whoever was most flexible at simply assigning the right work to the right person would be the most successful. That was kind of going back a few years.
Yeah.
Where my head was at. I think where I've gotten to is that both are correct. That is to say, you can have a highly optimized, flexible mentorship apprentice model that Andy described and be very successful because you've built what you're building is a talent ecosystem around your organization where people feel connected. And even if they do a tour of duty somewhere else, they'll come back. And when they have spare cycles, they think about how do they contribute those spare cycles back to your organization, you as an employer, whether they're currently full-time employed there or not. So that's one model. And the other model, and you're fully invested, right? You are making sure that everyone who is connected to an alumni, future potential employee is learning and developing, and you keep them in the sphere. The other one is, I'm just going to go, full gig economy. I'm basically just going to pay for skills. I'll hire whatever I need. People, I'll pay them above market so that I get the best talent. And then when I don't need someone anymore, they go find something else. And I don't feel bad about that because I know that they have lots of opportunities because I've been paying for the best skills. The challenge that many employers have today is they are neither one. They're in this middle pocket where they're not investing in their talent ecosystem and they're not willing to pay for the best skills to work for them and then let those people go when they don't need that skill set anymore. And so you have to kind of figure out as an employer, what's your culture, what's your style, what kind of company do you want to build? And you have to double down on one or the other. But being in the middle is where you have all the inefficiencies that companies have had classically without the commitment, right? You're not committing to your employees aren't going to commit back to you.
Right.
And so you're going to have this mix of talent within the company and you're not going to have any efficiencies at all.
Interesting. As we've been having this conversation, is this idea of mentoring, and is that the gold standard in that are all leaders up for that? I've definitely worked with leaders who feel like that's out of scope for them. That goes an extra mile for their employees that they don't feel as part of the social contract, right? Like, so is there something in the middle, right? Because mentorship requires a lot of investment and a lot of interest. I think that leaders who are reluctant, and I have funny stories about conversations about that with leaders who are just like, wait, do we have to support the employees? Like, don't we just pay them? I wonder, how do we kind of spoon feed that thinking to leaders who are feeling like I'm nobody's mentor, right? I want to get my job done, but I'm not responsible for you. Where is the middle that you're referring to, Omer? I think that's such an important question.
I think the middle is that disconnect. If as a employer, as a leader, an executive, if I want what Andy's describing, I don't hire those leaders. I just don't. I can't employ people who are transactional. If I want a mentorship model, I have to, talking about what skills matter, I have to over-index when recruiting leaders into my organization for people who are naturally mentors. and teach them, right? Or I go the other way and I say people can find their mentors elsewhere. And I'm just going to hire transactional leaders and I'm going to build a transactional business, which is perfectly fine, but you can't mix and match.
Yeah, I think it's dead on. Like, I think there are a lot of ways to be successful. I have a good friend who runs a company that's like fiercely transactional in how his relationship with his employees and contractors, maniacally so. And it's a very successful business. But you don't go there to grow and develop.
Right.
You go there to make money, but it was a very different thing, right? Like, at the other extreme, like this model where you've got lots of leaders who are really committed to people's professional development, even at the detriment of what might be best for whatever organization they happen to be working with. There are physics to this thing where if you integrate your personal interests and the things you care about with your professional interests, almost often your work has more meaning in it, right? And if you pursue this transactional path, well, it really is about money. And like the worst thing to do is be in a transactional environment and think that you're going to get meaning from your work. Like there's no way, right? So you got to pick which model works for you. And part of the hard part for younger folks, I think, is that like you don't really know how to assess like what's what, right? And again, like the ability to understand the values at work and the kind of environment that you might be plugging into when you take a job, I think is essential. This is what Paula and I were trying to do with our book. It's like, really own that assessment early on of whether you're getting into a place that cares about developing people and is really committed to it, or it's transactional. And God forbid, there are companies out there that will tell you that they're all about professional development. And then when you get, again, it's all this bullshit HR stuff, right?
Right.
It doesn't really lead anywhere, right? And so I think those are the most dangerous ones, right? Where they say the words, but don't actually practice it.
Caring about employees and mentoring them is never to the detriment of the company if there's a long-term view. Because what you are
right.
building, and this is a concept that we've been exploring at Askfora it's a little ambiguous, but of a talent ecosystem where the talent that you tap into, whether it's a bunch of freelancers that you just call up and hire for the odd job, or it's employees that you bring in to spend a lot of time while you're developing them doing work, that's your talent ecosystem. It's not just the people who are actively getting paid to do work today. So investing, if you're building a company in that style or running a company that has that mentorship model, even mentoring someone to leave is never to the detriment, I think, of the company. And getting that point across to people because of, Rachael, what you were saying earlier, which is what am I going to do? Train someone to leave? No, you're going to train someone to continue to be part of our ecosystem.
Right. I had with an HR leader who was saying, we have this workforce we like, but how do we get them to understand they need other skills to be able to stay with us? And we don't want to just fire all of them. Like, we want them here. We like them. How do we get them there? How do we help them understand that growth is important to them, to us, to where we're all going together?
In terms of skill development, and maybe I'm just massively biased by spending most of my time in early stage companies, but I don't think you can take it out of context of like the tours of duty and the career acts. Like in these tours of duty or career acts, they have like a beginning, a middle, and an end. And theoretically, there's some outcome associated with that career act. And so the skill development, I think, is best done in context of things that you're trying to accomplish. I have a liberal arts undergrad, and so like I believe in learning for the sake of learning in all kinds of ways, but I think it's not, functional in the workplace. And when it comes to this skill development thing, that you invest in learning in context of work should always be in context of things you're trying to accomplish. And it's easier in smaller companies where like you just don't have resources to go spend time on things that, aren't in context of outcomes. And again, but what happens in bigger companies is you get people spending time on all this random skill development, and like, is it worthwhile?
I think there's a natural fear in large organizations among managers who are not the executives. They have a team, they have a goal, and they don't have the right people on the team. There's a fear of doing this sort of inline learning and development where you take someone who doesn't have the skills, but has the potential. You say, go do it. We'll support you. We'll help you figure it out. Maybe there'll be some hiccups. Maybe you'll fail.
Yeah.
We're gonna develop your skills as you're solving the problem. To Andy's point, startups have no choice.
Sure.
That's naturally where it happens. Large companies, they have the choice. Fire everyone and hire a new staff if they really want to. But if you don't want to fire everyone and hire a new staff, your only other choice is to go full swing into, we will mentor you to learn these skills while you have to deliver.
In defense of my brothers and sisters in HR, which is that, which I've never said before in my entire life, nor do I ever think that I've thought that thought, but I think there is the intention. I've designed those trainings, I've facilitated, I've coached. The intention is there to help people do their best in the organization. They want to make a difference and they want people to learn and succeed. That's why they're there. And so I think that what I'm hearing from our conversation, so many things. I wish we had more time to look at mentorship, for example, and break that into the set of skills. What are we talking about? We're talking about being able to reflect back what we're hearing, right? We're talking about being able to be vulnerable. We're talking about being able to think, I think you talked about this, Andy, look into the future and think about what's next for folks. So much to unpack here. I think the idea of becoming collectively more comfortable with these experiments. As we wrap up this conversation, what stands out to you as something you want leaders and folks to know who want to make a difference in this space?
What I've been discovering, and this is by no means an answer, I can't point to tons of examples and say this is hard proof, but leaving aside the job titles and responsibilities and what really ends up forcing ownership and forcing loneliness, hiring someone and saying, this is your job, go figure it out. Putting that aside and saying, no, this is the collective problem we're trying to solve.
Yep.
Here are the set of skills required to do it. And maybe we figured them all out. Maybe there's still some gaps. And then figuring out who you want to work with, what skills do they bring to the table, and what skills can they also develop and learn and add and contribute to the collective goal. It's a much more team-oriented approach to work that introduces flexibility where ordinarily you'd say, if I have uncertainty, I'm just going to pick a path and go for it, which is much harder. That's a very high risk approach, and people are taking the high risk approach without quite understanding that it is that high risk. They have to pull back and say, no, we're going to solve this together and everyone's on the team and we're going to develop everyone on the team.
Andy, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, again, like this context matters for me a lot. Like you think about, if you think about developing skills and inspiring and managing teams, when you're in sports, like you go to practice and what you're doing in practice and skill development is like, it's in context of trying to win a game. And my favorite reference here, it always comes back to rugby for me, is the New Zealand All Blacks, who are arguably the winningest sports team in the history of the world. And they, are really, truly remarkable in that the basis for their performance is all culture and all the skill development, everything that goes on is all in context of like building behaviors and building a certain culture. And so I think it's cliche, but like, building culture and setting the context for what you're trying to win and why is like the frame of reference. And then, okay, now I know what I need to go do in terms of skill development and where the gaps are. Like it all flows from those two things. So that's kind of, for better or worse, always want to bring it back to culture.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you both. This has been great, and looking forward to sharing your book, checking out Askfora. Thanks everyone for being here. See you soon.
Thank you. Great to see you.
That conversation left me with a lot to think about. What does apprenticeship look like in 2024? How do we think about transactional versus transformational leadership approaches? Shout out to my grad school friends. How do we manage uncertainty? And thinking about what Herminia Ibarra wrote in her book, Working Identity, about changing careers. Rather than taking a big leap into the unknown, she advises crafting experiments. We talked about Andy and his co-author Paula's term personal residence. Really, what would you like to learn? And what challenges can you give yourself to practice those skills and figure out how change, how one choice fits into your narrative of your work and life? That's what makes the future of work and the skill economy so cool. Is whether we're leading an organization or working independently, we all get to craft experiments and keep growing. The Breadwinners has a special offer for our listeners to access Askfora and get some personalized learning recommendations and links to courses that fit your growth goals. Go to askfora.com/breadwinners. As always, you will find all of the relevant links in the show notes. You can find us at thebreadwinnerspodcast.com and everywhere podcasts live. If you like what we're up to this season, please leave us a review or email us at thebreadwinnerspodcast@gmail.com. We want to know if this resonates. I want to know if this resonates with you. I want to give a special shout out to our longtime producers, Sound Advice Strategies, as they help me craft some experiments of my own on this show. Until next time, keep talking and supporting each other to recognize the great opportunities ahead.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.